The long-awaited Apex Survival update has released for Space Engineers, adding a whole host of new survival mechanics, a bunch of amazing new blocks, and a lot of other things that we'll be covering in this video. So let's take a look. Normally when we do one of these update videos, we cover the new blocks and the new features first, but today I want to start with the new DLC blocks as they are absolutely beautiful. Here you can see the new cosmetic variants of the drill, grinder and welder, and as always, these are just leagues better than the ones we previously had in the game. The drill has this new excavator design that you can see here, and it spins, and as I always say, I love spinning things, so I absolutely love this design. They are available for small and large grid. As you can see here, a small grid variant is on the front of this ship, and they are just absolutely phenomenal looking. Way better than the ones we had before, and a fantastic cosmetic upgrades to your builds. The DLC includes half block variants for the oxygen farm and the new block, the algae farm, and they function exactly the same as their base counterparts, generating oxygen and algae whilst exposed to sunlight. They are just cosmetic squared off versions of the block, as opposed to the more rounded base game variants. You can see here that I've got them both on a solar array that always points towards the sun, and if I come around the back of them, you'll see that my algae farm has generated 3 algae, which we'll discuss what this is used for later in the video when we go over the food system, and my oxygen farm is generating 1.77 litres per minute of oxygen. Now obviously these aren't conveyed into anything, so it's not actually going anywhere, but I really liked how they looked on this solar array, as opposed to how the rounded variants look. These two blocks are purely cosmetic, and they are the Insect Terrarium Desert and the Insect Terrarium Forest. And they are obviously meant for decoration of your bases and have different wildlife in them. For example, the forest one has butterflies in it and a snail down here. And as you can see, this snail slowly moves around the terrarium, eventually doing a loop of this rock. I know before you ask, you cannot eat the snail. And then the desert variation has lots of different bugs in it, with ants at the bottom, flies up here, more flies. I presume this is a moth rather than a butterfly, and that kind of stuff. I kind of see these blocks as a companion to the aquarium, which was added a couple of DLCs ago, and you just place them in your bases to add extra detail and make them feel more alive. The insect planter block, first of all, spins and is another cosmetic block designed to detail your bases, with the idea of it being a cosmetic variant to this planter block as opposed to being linked to the new farming system. It does look quite fun when you stack a bunch of them, as due to the way the glass in them works with its slight tint, it kind of gives the impression that it goes on much further than it actually does. And as I said, they spin, and I love spinning things, so this is a 10 out of 10 new block. The Survival Kit Type 2 is available for both small and large grid, and it's a cosmetic variant of the base game Survival Kit, but it also holds another secret other than just being a cosmetic variant. And that is orientation. As you can see, these survival kits are orientated to have the conveyor ports on the top, whereas the base game survival kit only has conveyor ports on the side, which for me personally made it very inconvenient to ever place the thing, as it meant I had to somehow hide a conveyor on the side of the block, whereas with the new one having it on the bottom, it means I can much easier hide the conveyor in the floor or on the roof of my ships. Also, the design of this new survival kit also fits much better with all the new inset blocks and the new wall blocks we've been getting recently, as opposed to the old one, which kind of always stuck out like a sore thumb next to them. And also the fact that the conveyor's on the side, so I'd always have to remove one of the blocks next to it to have a conveyor on the side for it to work. The Ore Detector Type 2 spins, most importantly, and is a cosmetic variant of the base game Ore Detector. And I'm going to be honest with this, I'm probably never going to use the base game Ore Detector ever again. This is so much better looking, mainly because it spins, but also, what is the old Ore Detector even supposed to be? It's available for small and large grid, and there's actually quite a significant difference between the large grid and the small grid version, with the small grid version having these little flaps that come out of the side, and the large grid version having these panels that look like they expand out the side of it. The storage bin set is a collection of 3 cosmetic freight blocks. And if you go over to them, you can see that they've got this zippable bit at the top, and you press F and you can look inside of them. And they don't have a lot of storage space, but as you can't connect them to your main system, I doubt that'd be much of an issue. You can see that this one has 1 crate and has 1,500 litres of storage. This one has 3 crates and has 4,500 litres of storage. And then the final one has 8 crates and has 12,000 litres of storage. So don't worry, it's all scientifically correct. There's a new set of conduit blocks that have been added in this update, which you can see here, where there's 11 different variants of them. You can see here there's this sparking variant, which is definitely my favourite. It looks so good visually. There's this ending cable variant, which also looks very good. I kind of like the idea of using these as like cosmetic power cabling. I don't want proper power cabling in the game because that'd be a pain, but having this to add extra details to your grids is a great idea. And then of course you can spice it up using the damage variants to make it look like your ship needs maintenance and stuff like that. Just an amazing set of blocks all round. And that's not just because it's a cable, it definitely is. And the last 3 things included in this DLC are these 3 warning signs, one to indicate there's a mess hall for food, one to indicate that an area is cold, and one to indicate that there's an area with radiation, which all 3 of these are very pertinent to the new features added in this update. But that does beg the question why we cover the DLC first, and not after we discuss all these new features. Well, that's because Keen Software House gave me 3 keys for the Apex Survival DLC to give away for you guys to win. The instructions on how to win this giveaway are in this video here, which I'll link in the pinned comment below this video. So if you want to win a copy of the DLC, check that video out and follow the instructions in there. Some of you guys might have missed that video and missed the giveaway, so there is an easy way that you can make sure that never happens again. And that's if you like this video and subscribe to this channel, and that way you're more likely to be recommended my videos in the future. Right, let's get into the new features added in this update. For starters, the world settings have now been organised into categories. You can see at the top there is basic settings, which are just the basic things like creative and survival, the option to enable multiplayer and autosaves and stuff. Then we have global modifiers, which affects your assembler, welder, grinding speed, character inventory, grid size, etc, etc. Then we have the environmental options for lightning damage, weather, asteroids, meteor activity and stuff like that. Then survival options, where there's a couple of new ones, which we'll talk about in a minute. A section for controlling encounters and NPCs. A section for combat and PvP, a section for Misc options, and then a section for experimental settings, which was previously called experimental mode, but now you can enable each of the settings individually. The old world settings were just awful. They were not organised whatsoever, so the world options being organised into categories makes them much easier to use. Like I said, there's a couple of new world options as well, some of these pertaining to the new environmental hazards and the food system, which we'll be talking about later. But there's 2 options I want to mention now, which is survival buffs and reduced stats on respawn, which are enabled by default in a new survival world. Survival buffs slowly levels up your character the longer that you play, and every 45 minutes you're alive, these buffs go up to the next level. And each level improves your health, your movement speed, and your welding and grinding speed, whilst reducing your overall oxygen consumption rate. But if you die, those buffs will be reset back to 0. There's also reduced stats on respawn, which also affects you when you die, and it makes it so rather than dying being a soft reset, and all of your resource bars going back to 100%, with this setting on, after you die it sets them to 20% of their total value to add a bit more punishment to dying. But as those are world options, if you don't like those settings, you can just toggle them on and off at your leisure. But I'm personally a big fan of these changes, and I would definitely recommend that you do at least try them out in the survival mode. Random encounters have received a massive overhaul in this update, with all of the old random encounters being removed and 30 brand new ones have been added. And let me tell you, they are amazing. I recently did a video where I went over some of the new random encounters, and some of them absolutely blew me away with how good they are. They're not just go to a place, get shot and get resources anymore. There's a story to them, there's random events. For example, in one of them, I was just walking around minding my own business, I walked into a room, and that room just detached from the station and fired off into space. I was essentially space kidnapped. And there was another one which had this long note about the story of this guy who'd been trapped in this station and about his quest to escape. And you can follow the path that this guy took to escape the station and eventually find out what became of him. And the attention to detail in these new encounters is amazing. So I definitely recommend you check out these encounters, as they are some of the best content that Space Engineers has to offer now, along with the global encounters that are added in the Contact update. I should note that random encounters only spawn in space, as the planetary encounter system is completely separate from them, and they've indicated this by renaming the encounter density world option to random encounter density, which you can use to configure the rate that random encounters spawn in, from lowest density to low density to normal density to high density. And they do spawn at a very high frequency on high density, so if you really want to find some, that's the best way to do it. The encounters range from difficulty from encounter to encounter. Some of them are just abandoned places to explore with no danger. Some of them spawn in enemies when you go near them. And some of them, a very small amount of them, but some of them actively seek you out and try to get you. So happy hunting out there, engineers. And don't forget, when you explore the random encounters, the most important thing you can find in them is lore. Lots and lots of lore. A number of new environmental hazards were added in this update, and I've already done a whole video going through them all in depth, so check out that video if you want to know absolutely everything to do with them, but I'll briefly go over each of them here. One of the environmental hazards is radiation, which is obviously a hazard that ticks up as you're irradiated. When you become irradiated, this little bar appears on the bottom left, and it slowly ticks up to 75 where you start to take damage, and then at 100 you start to take damage at a very significant rate, and it's basically death when you get to this level. Radiation can be received in a couple different ways. We'll cover weather in a second, but there are new radiation storms that spawn in, specifically on Pertam and the alien planet, and these radiation storms slowly irradiate you over time. There is a world option for solar radiation, which you can configure the intensity of, that slowly irradiates you whilst you're in sunlight, but you can obviously build shelter and also hide in the shadows of rocks and stuff to avoid that. I do think solar radiation is a really interesting challenge to the game, so I definitely recommend checking it out at least once if you want to experience it, as it really changes how you play the game. And the third type of radiation is received from damaged reactors, which is the most lethal form of radiation, as whilst you can hide from all the other radiation sources by being in a cockpit, a cryotube, or in a pressurized grid, radiation from reactors is able to get you in any circumstance. So if your reactor gets damaged, either be ready to repair it, or you better start thinking about the ability to eject that reactor from your ship. Aside from being in an environment where radiation can't get to you, there is another way to get around radiation, and that is the anti-radiation medkit, which only spawns in random encounters, unknown signals or trade stations, but it is very powerful, giving you complete immunity to radiation for 10 minutes, and also removing all of your currently accumulated radiation. So these are very good to have in a pinch. Whilst you're on the topic of medkits though, it's also worth mentioning that you're able to craft medkits and power kits at the assembler now. You can see that the medkit requires iron, silicon and nickel, and the power kit also requires iron, silicon and nickel, just in different amounts. And these are actually super cheap, so there's actually a great utility to them. As I mentioned earlier, weather has been overhauled in this update, and there's a large variety of new weather events, such as toxic haze, which irradiates you, hailstorms, which damage you over time as you're hit by hail, and sandstorms do the same thing, as you'll be hit by bits of debris that are blown around with the sand, and a bunch of other new weather events that you can see on this chart here. And the system just has been greatly expanded overall, with the events having new effects. Like I mentioned, they damage you, some of them do radiation, like the toxic haze, a lot more of them spawn in lightning now, and they all have an impact on the efficiency of your wind turbines and your solar panels, the overall temperature, which affects your energy upkeep, and also the breathability of the atmosphere. So check out this chart here that the developers released that shows you all of the new weather events. And as I mentioned earlier, we covered all of these environmental hazards in depth in this video here, which is linked on the card in the top right. The last environmental hazard to go over is meteor storms, which aren't technically new, but they have been overhauled this update. The main change is that they now target players rather than grids, so this means that meteor storms will only spawn where players are actively playing the game, whereas opposed before in multiplayer, grids would just be constantly bombarded by meteors. And also a second annoying thing for multiplayer is that meteors used to cause voxel deformations and place little bits of ore down, but that also meant that it was really easy to find players' bases because you just look where all the meteor impacts were. I haven't played with meteors on probably since I started playing the game, and playing with them now, they actually are much more reasonable and much more a threat that you can actually deal with, whereas before I felt they were just really annoying. One of the highlight new features of this update is the new food system, which is a new optional system which when enabled adds a hunger bar to the bottom left of your screen. You can configure how fast your hunger bar drops over time, with it being 45 minutes on the higher speed, 1.5 hours on moderate, and 3 hours on slow if you want a more chill experience. But also, as I mentioned, it's an optional feature, so if you really don't want to deal with it, you can just turn it off. On the Earth-like, alien, and Pertan planets, wild plants spawn, which you can harvest to get base food items such as grain, vegetables, fruit, and mushrooms. Additionally, you can loot meat by killing wolves or sabroids, which can then be cooked at the survival kit and the new block, the food processor, which we'll talk about in a second. If you're in an environment where food doesn't naturally spawn, you can use the algae farm, which you mentioned earlier in the video, which generates a small amount of algae from sunlight, which can then be converted in the survival kit or food processor into a new food item called kelp crisp, which only restores a small amount of food, but it is an easy and renewable way to sustain yourselves in more hostile environments. In order to farm food, you need to use this new block, the farm plot, which needs to be used alongside another new block, the irrigation system, which is a block that you place ice into, which then generates water for your farm plots, so you need to make sure that you use conveyors to connect these two blocks together. Additionally, you'll need the food processor, which I've mentioned twice now, which whilst its primary function is to make meal packs, it also has a tab at the top which you can switch to create seeds from your base food items. You can then plant those seeds in the farm plot, and then after a period of time, they will grow into full crops, which then you can harvest, or alternatively, you can use a collector on a subgrid in order to create an automatic way of harvesting your crops. That was only a brief overview of the food system, but I have covered the food system in its entirety in depth in these two videos here, so if you want to know absolutely everything to do with the food and farming system, check out those two videos here. If you create a new survival world and spawn on a planet, rather than being dropped in a drop pod, you are now dropped in this rover that you can see here, which is actually an absolutely massive improvement to the survival experience. As someone who was so annoyed about how you started in Space Engineers that they made an entire YouTube channel to help people get started, I can't tell you how happy I am that they've made this a feature. This means at the beginning of the game you have so much more maneuverability than you normally would. This thing has an ore detector on it, which means it's really easy to find ores at the beginning of the game, whereas previously you'd have to actually build a rover or a ship to actually have the mobility to get started. And this is just an absolutely phenomenal change to the game. I can't tell you how much of a massive improvement this is going to make to new players. Well look, we just found iron. There you go, that was what, 30 seconds since spawning? Incredible stuff. It's also worth noting that the new rover actually spawns with 500 iron, 50 nickel and 50 silicon in it, which is actually a massive boost to getting started in the game to save you from immediately mining hundreds of rocks. And the starting pod and also the space starting pod spawn with 4 kelp crisps on them, so you don't immediately starve as soon as you spawn in. So a tiny change like replacing the starting pod with this rover makes a absolutely massive difference to both new players of the game and players that want to get back into a new survival world. And I can't tell you how thankful I am that they've made this change. One thing you might have noticed is that the skybox of the game has been changed. Whereas before it was this kind of greeny skybox, it's now been replaced with this much darker and kind of a little bit blue skybox, very reminiscent of the Space Engineers 2 one. And visually this is a massive improvement to the game. And along with this skybox change, they've also made it much darker at night and also made shadows much darker, which is also a big visual improvement to the game as well. But also I'm the kind of person that likes to see even if it's not realistic, so we'll see how I feel about this in the future. It is very dark though. I don't know if this is coming across on YouTube. It was never this dark in the game before. The cost to assemble the higher tier hand tools has been changed. If I hover over the enhanced grinder, you can see it requires the regular grinder and cobalt ingot. If I hover over the proficient grinder, you can see that it requires the enhanced grinder and the silver ingot. And if I hover over the elite grinder, you can see it requires the proficient grinder and a platinum ingot. So now each of these tools are actually more of a definitive upgrade to the previous tool, whereas before you'd have all these old tools lying around as you didn't really have anything to do with them once you'd upgraded. It's also worth noting that the highest tiers of tools have all been nerfed, so it's more of a linear progression, rather than the elite tools being far better than the previous tier, but you can always just turn up the welding and grinding speed in the world settings anyway, so this doesn't make that much of a difference. There's a bunch of other changes, like the offensive AI controller got some tweaks. They've made a bunch of tweaks to the way the production tabs work, where if you click on the production tab it remembers the last block you're in, and they've also added an inventory button on the bottom left so you can get straight to the inventory of that block. There are a bunch of fixes to air tightness and a bunch of general bug fixes overall, so I'll link the full changelog in the description below if you want to check that out. But it's also worth mentioning that the theme of the next update for Space Engineers has already been announced, and that is a quality of life and bug fix update. So that kind of sounds like a Most Wanted 2 update, where they add a bunch of community requested quality of life features to the game. One of the features they've already mentioned that is coming is joystick support, which I know is something that people have been asking for a very long time, so that'll be finally coming in the next update. And they've also mentioned that they've got a few other surprises up their sleeve. So I do have to ask the question, is one of those surprises VR potentially? Thinking face? I'm not expecting it, but we'll have to see. And they've also mentioned that the update after that one, which will probably come out next year, is going to be an update that overhauls the economy stations and the mission system in Space Engineers 1. And that is very interesting. I made a whole video years ago on the economy system and how whilst I very much liked it, it's kind of a bit weird on how it all works. So if they're going to overhaul that and make it better and make it up to the standards of the encounters that we currently have in the game, I'm very excited for that. Like the mission system that's in the economy system, in theory could be very interesting, but they don't really do anything with it. But if they're going to make those missions like the random encounters that were added in this update, oh, that's very exciting. I cannot wait. So let me know which of these features or new blocks added in this update is your favourite, and also let me know what quality of life feature you'd most like in the next update. And as always, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel to keep up to date with everything to do with Space Engineers 1 and 2. And you've probably heard there's some weird things going on with YouTube at the moment, and I didn't think they would affect me, but they definitely have. So if you'd like to go the extra mile and support this channel, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member or a patron with the links in the description below.